Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to have you here for this next iteration of Always Subject to Change, a collaboration between the Wexner Center for the Arts and WOSU. I'm Johanna Burton, the Executive Director of the Wexner Center for the Arts. I'm here with Ann Hamilton, and we are really excited to welcome two people actually to our podcast, to our whatever cast this week, Suzanne Bocanegra and David Lang.
Great, thanks, Johanna. So I'm going to introduce Suzanne and David just really briefly, and then we'll get to the conversation. Suzanne Bocanegra is a visual artist who's common material and who works with common materials. And I would say, if this is fair, Suzanne, you can tell me, whose making hand originates in textiles, but whose stories originate in examining the history and practice of visual art itself. So you work in collage, video, performance, installation. You make costumes for friends, you collaborate. Yours is a hybrid practice that both invents in response to very different contexts. And I think that responsiveness to different forms and contexts and the invention of forms is something that you and David share. So I should say that you are not only collaborators, but you are married and share a life and children and everything together. And David, David, what I hear from vocalists is that you write for voice like nobody else. So David Lang is a composer. He's won a Pulitzer Prize. He had a opera premiere with the New York Philharmonic last year, right, David? Titled Prisoner of the State. And I think really importantly, not only your really wide-ranging practice as a composer, but also your work within the field. You are one of the founders of Bang on a Can, and Bang on a Can is made a context for new music, for young musicians in a way that I think is really unparalleled. So I think neither of you are conventional in your form. And this podcast is really a way for us to ask this question about process and practice, about like, how do you come to make the work that you make? And how are you coming to work now in the conditions in which we find ourselves? And so I wanted to kind of lead off talking about the word difficulty. I think you could say we're in a difficult moment. There's so many huge, enormous things going on. The pandemic, obviously, what's going on in Washington today, social justice movements, and the work we have to do as a culture. But I was also thinking within each of your practice, the way in which maybe you've made things difficult for yourself, but you've also made things difficult for your performers. And that challenge. And so Suzanne, I'm thinking about the first performance of yours I saw in New York City, and you had people who had perhaps never touched a violin, conducted by Todd Reynolds, playing together as a kind of orchestra. And the vulnerability of putting yourself in that place as a performer, of not really having confidence with what you're doing. And then David, I think about how, you've talked about the way that you work in your music. Sometimes it makes enormous challenges for the musicians to figure out a way to play what you have written, to respond to what you've done. So I wanted you to talk about that within your practices, but also maybe how that's being asked differently because of this larger condition in which we find ourselves.
You first.
Me first? It's funny, I haven't thought about that piece. It's called Re-Remember, it's with 50 people who've never played violin before, and they get an hour lesson. And then I use kind of all the tools of the theatrical world. I have a lighting designer, and I have a sound engineer, and I have someone mixing the sound. And so there's all this kind of support underneath it to make it into this real this performance that has a lot of impact. And so one of the things that I thought was so interesting when I first did it was that these people who'd never played violin before had this amazing experience of being a performer for the first time for most people, and what that meant to be spotlighted like that, and also to play with other people. And that was the first time I did it. It was like over 10 years ago. And I was just wondering, as you were talking about it, I was supposed to do it again this spring, and everything got canceled. But I was just wondering about how different that piece would feel given the context of what's going on in our world right now. And I don't really know. I'd have to think about that, because it's a lot about people working together, and people meeting each other for the first time, and sharing this really intense experience. And then there's an audience too that also has that experience. So anyway, I don't know how to quite, it's interesting to think about how different it would read now.
Mhm. Well, there's an element of there has to be so much trust for that to happen,
Mhm.
right? And like we're definitely all in this together. Um, and
And the people who volunteer to do it, they never know what they're getting themselves into either.
Mhm.
And so that's always a really kind of a fun and very sometimes scary and sometimes exhilarating experience for everybody.
Mhm.
But
It's almost like when it makes me think that when you allow yourself, or you make a condition, as an artist, for other people to step into a place where they can allow their own vulnerability, then there's this incredible strength that comes out of sharing that vulnerability.
mhm.
And in many ways, I feel like that's where we are right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I actually think that piece also gives, since I'm not a professional musician either, it gives people the opportunity to understand another side of making music too, and that you can only get by hands-on. So I mean, most people never held a violin before, or never followed a conductor, or all of those things.
Well, also, I think one thing interesting about that piece is that nobody really wants to look like they don't know what they're doing in public. We're also concerned about what our public face is, and especially I think in the art world, where so much of what you're responding to is somebody's confidence. So really what you did is you said you've invented a project where the people who are performing it have to deal with being unconfident in public. So there's a certain kind of nobility, I think, that comes out of that, which I really like. Plus that piece also has an amplified weaver, and it has these other kinds of things involved. So, but that is kind of interesting to think about right now, because none of us actually have much confidence about what we're doing in public, because our public options are so fraught at this moment. So maybe it's exactly the right time to do it again.
Yeah.
Well, when we can do it again.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's also, I didn't see that piece, obviously, but hearing you talk about it, and it actually applies to both of your work. You're allowing people to be uncertain in public, but they're also undercover, because you can't tell who's messing up if there's 50 people.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is interesting, and I wonder a little bit, actually taking this cue from Anne's question. We've been talking a little bit about how artists traffic in uncertainty. That's something kind of that's part of being a maker. But now that the world has met us in a way with this kind of constant context of uncertainty, providing more uncertainty, or providing the kind of comfort that can come alongside it, feels also really important. So as you're describing how that piece, in a way, because I am truly a non-performer. Like, I'm the person who, I'm all about setting up the conditions, but then I like to step way back. So it's funny I would play the violin for you, Suzanne, because there would be 49 other people. But if you asked me to do it by myself, I would say no. So I wonder if you can both talk your work, both of you, together and separately, is always about bringing people together. Can you just talk about that, both practically and philosophically a little bit? Because I find it fascinating, in both your work.
Well, I think if I can jump in, I think this is, I think, one of the reasons why music is really needed, and why music is really useful is because, especially at a moment like now where we have a society where there are factions, where people are actually arguing about why we are together. We can't agree on facts. We can't agree on our information. We can't agree on why we need each other. One of the things that's really important about music, which is, I think, kind of a good lesson for us all, is that you can't do it unless you have already made the decision beforehand that the other people involved have a meaningful role. You can't be in an orchestra and say, oh, I'm going to play my violin badly so that the person who is next to me looks bad, right? I don't agree with the people next to me, so I'm going to wreck it.
Or you can't say, I don't believe these notes.
Yeah, I don't believe in the note, right? But the thing that's really interesting about it is it's an act of faith from the very beginning. You have to believe that this activity, that this coming together is capable of carrying meaning and capable of creating beauty and capable of carrying weight before it can actually create meaning or create beauty or carry weight. You need the belief in advance. And I believe that at this moment, it's kind of true about democracy as well. And it's kind of true about civilization. If you can't imagine a role for other people in your life, you won't be able to have a role for other people in your life if you don't believe in that. So I think probably at other times in our life, when people were more religious or when people had more connection to their communities, I mean, maybe there were other ways that people got this information from that wasn't music. But I look at music right now as being one of the only places where we do have this kind of utopian way of building relationships to our neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking last week with Mark Lomax, and I had this fantasy about, like, if every person could stand on their front stoop or on their porch or whatever they have and drum, and the neighborhoods could drum to each other, how do we begin to feel connected, right? And music gives us that. I think, David, when I think a lot about some of your music that I know, and there's so much that I don't know, but I think about how it allows me to feel the thing that I know that I didn't know that I know. It's like it just immediately takes me to some place that is not for me about the surface of language, and it touches us. Yeah, maybe I'm saying like totally cliche things, but it does.
Well, they sound nice, so you might as well keep it up.
Okay. And, and I'm thinking about how both of you have worked with like choral structures. Suzanne, I'm thinking about the piece, the piece that David wrote really for Site Santa Fe, and your project with the nuns' habits. And I'm thinking, David, about the piece at Lincoln Center and the piece that people experience walking along the High Line. So that in both of your forms is this invitation to some sort of collective, not just the structure of the music. And so now we can't be together. We can't all gather in Lincoln, Center outside around the plaza. We can't, necessarily be in the same space. And so I'm just curious how you're thinking about, like, what does even the choral form mean, not only musically, but also experientially? Does that take you anywhere?
Does it take you somewhere?
No, it doesn't. I no.
It's really hard to do this thing, I mean, it's like I don't think there's any way to admit that, to not admit that we have been kind of humbled by the fact that we are doing everything, mediated by screens at this moment. I think actually one of the things that's left, oddly enough, and maybe it's the thing that we've been trying to concentrate on at Bang on a Can, and I've been trying to concentrate on individually, is just whether or not we feel optimistic about the future. So I think if you look at this as being, we need to invent an art form out of the internet, because that's the only future possible for us. That would be one thing, but the other possibility is that we're trying to keep the flame of the thing that we love alive, so that when we can actually be together, we can remember how great that was, and we can maybe appreciate it more than we used to appreciate it. We used to take it for granted.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's happened, is because we haven't had that capability, it really makes you cherish it so much more. And also it makes you really think about things that, because the first thing that happened when the pandemic started is you had to start thinking about the pieces you were working on, and would they work on a screen, or did they have to have a live audience? And then you had to really sort of parse that out. And people started making decisions about maybe it could be recorded and presented, or maybe it could be live streamed, or would that not work for that piece? And those were all really sort of interesting questions that came up, because questions that would have never come up otherwise. And
after a while, you just imagine that every piece of art that you are doing has to be on Netflix. And that's the only format which is valid in the world at this particular moment,
well,
So I do think that that there are people who are trying very hard to make it so that this interface works, and that there is an art form which is created which can't exist in any other world. And that I think is really exciting, and I'm happy that they're going to do it. But for me, what I really miss is being around other people. And I think that, for me, the spark of live performance is the thing that makes music work, that the person making it is in front of the person receiving it, and that they are sharing this, kind of vibration together. And so I'm really, I'm aesthetically lonesome at this moment, I guess, is what I would say.
It's interesting though. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that period of time where sort of dance for camera was happening, right? And the sort of playing with mediation because you could. So the sort of promise of presence was there, but you could sort of decide. And actually, this is going to be a gross, probably overstatement to apply to both your works, but you both traffic in mediation in really interesting ways in live performance, right? So kind of the way in which you utilize vessels, whether they're people, whether they're through kind of, again, mediated experiences. I'm thinking about the natural way in which music is played by other people, or Suzanne, very literally, your voice is being pushed into other performers who articulate for you. So I wonder, it's interesting to think about mediation both as there's deficit, we're talking about that for sure, but also the ways in which it's a dispersion and a distribution. And I certainly don't mean that there's something super satisfying about sitting away. We'd all rather be in a room together right now. But can you kind of back up pre-pandemic and talk a little bit about, this is probably a phase 2 of my first question about collaboration, but it's also about how you make a work and then it becomes sort of embodied by others, which in both your works very differently, I think is really interesting.
How you make the piece is
in your case, your work is often could be a one-person show performed by you, but you decide not to do that, right? I guess I just want to understand a little bit, as we're talking about mediation, the ways in which you've used it before, and hear you talk about it, because I find it fascinating.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about as we were talking about live performance is that when the pandemic first happened, I started thinking about filming this next piece that I've been working on. And it's a lecture with an actor, and it's about the 16th century tapestry at the Met. And I was gonna I decided, okay, well, this is the only way to present it, so I'm going to film it and I'm going to have it presented. But then, as I thought about it more, one of the interesting things for me and the exciting things about doing these pieces is I don't know what you call them, like the mess ups, the accidents that happen when I'm reading, it's going into the actor's ear and they misinterpret it or they mishear, or this always happens. And also every time that I do these pieces, I've re-edited and rewritten the piece. So it's not, even though they've rehearsed the piece, they don't quite know what's coming next. And so without that, I thought, I don't think it's the same.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's the same thing. It's a different thing. So I'd have to sort of readjust it and reconfigure it and to make it into something a little bit different. And so anyway, I just was thinking about that, how there's certain things that you can't have when it's recorded. I mean, the same thing, the difference between listening to music on a CD and seeing a live performance.
Right.
And there's something about that excitement of that focus on an individual and how they're going to negotiate the time.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, it's just something that's what really interests me. That's one of the things that really interests me, I guess I should say. Because I'm still trying to figure out a way to do it in a way that can be pre-recorded. I just haven't quite figured that out yet.
It may be because I'm an audience member, not a maker, and because I write about things from the point of view of the outside. It's funny, I totally agree with you, and I can imagine from my perspective the kind of loneliness that you're both describing. But I actually feel like I see that live performance and then listening to the album as just neither one is better. I like them both. But they aren't the same. One isn't sort of the pale comparison of the other. When I always find that also kind of
yeah, I think that's totally true. But that's why I felt like if I was going to like pre-record one of these performances, I had to sort of restructure it in a way to take that.
Of course, it would be different. It would be a different piece.
Yeah, and so I haven't quite figured out that formula yet.
That's interesting.
Well, almost like the way that you have to structure into the piece itself, the difficulty, so that in fact you can't be completely good at it, right? So it's the same, it's that same, occupying that vulnerability, or like, whatever that is, that's like you're not quite practiced enough or whatever. I mean, I think. I don't know, David, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I just, I can think about it in terms of, pop music. If you think about it, there's some bands that make their music completely in the studio.
Yeah.
And then what you see in the live performance is as close a recreation of what could be done in the studio. And you always know that the recorded music was the place where the action is.
Yeah.
But then there's the opposite, which is where you try to preference the live performance, and the recording is a kind of, simulacrum of that. And I think where you come in that, on that spectrum says a lot about who you are. And, for me, I am personally, even though, of course, I love having recordings and it's really great, I am completely on the live performance side.
Yeah.
And the perverse thing about me, about what you are saying, Anne, about difficulty, is I think if you really want to make sure that your music lives more in the live world than in the recording world, then you can make things happen live that have accidents in them, that have pieces which are impossible to play properly, so that they can't be recorded. And in fact, I actually have a series of pieces which say that you can't record them, because to record them is to, well, I have an opera called The Whisper Opera, for example, which is one of my favorite pieces. And it's a piece that is so quiet that as the singers walk by you during the performance, you hear a little scrap of the of the story, but everyone is sitting in a different place. And so everyone has like an incomplete vision of the story. To record it would be to say that one version of the story is more important than the fact that an entire audience does not share the same version, which is the point. So, so I like to play with ways that the recording becomes something which is, clearly not where the action is.
Mhm. Well, and in that way, I feel like all making is kind of an act of finding, and it's the accidents that happen. It's like that way the work gives back and makes something that you couldn't like determine, right? And so so does that prepare us for the place we are, like this? How do we imagine a future, right? Like, I feel like that's one of the I feel like it's a responsibility that we're being given. I don't know how to even poke at it really, except that I'm an optimistic person. But it's like if you're exercised in allowing accidents, right? You're exercised in responsiveness. You're exercised in uh, being able to accommodate the thing that's not all figured out and
I,
not all perfected.
I'm just going to break in because I just got a news flash that Trump has been impeached. Just wanted to note it. So,
Again?
again.
Yeah.
But it's probably important. We've been noticing during these discussions that the last one we had was we didn't realize the Capitol was being stormed while we were speaking. So
The problem is every single day you will be doing these and you will have news flash like that, and each one will be more disturbing and shocking than the last.
and also to your point, I want to be very excited about this, but it's, as you said, again, okay. Yeah, but I'm noting it, 4:33 LA Times.
I was saying to a friend of mine this morning, it's just amazing that we've lived long enough so that we can actually compare the qualities of different impeachments.
Yeah.
Because in our lifetime, we've had 3 of them. It supposedly was very rare.
Right. That's right.
We almost had 4.
Mm.
So can I like shift this? I don't know if you're going to give us an imagination for the future, either one of you, but I know one of the things that's been really central, but I think to your life and to your practice is that both of you in different ways have not only made this condition within your work for different kinds of experience, but in your home. So in your loft in Soho in New York City, you have dedicated in a living space, and you've made a theater, and you've invited other artists to do projects, to experiment, and you've gathered small groups of people together to experience that. And it's magical. I mean, I've only been in the city to experience a few of them, but it's that way that you've just dedicated real estate in New York City, which is there's not a lot of extra space in people's living situations, and you've given it over to contributing really to the making of work. And I think, David, when I've watched the Bang on a Can marathons, the ones I've been able to listen in, these 6-hour-long musicians and composers talking and performing live in different spaces, I feel like I'm participating in something, even though it's on the screen. And it was the first thing that I experienced that really felt like that. And so, if one of the things we do is we might be involved in our own making, like Suzanne, you're working with the history of this huge narrative with a 16th century tapestry, but you're also making always conditions for experience for someone else, right? Whether that's another audience or an audience. And so I feel like as an artist right now, I feel like this tremendous pressure to kind of think about, well, how do I help make the condition? I think I've been a responder to conditions, and I would say, I know both of you have in your own practice, but how do we make the condition itself for work to happen? And if you have any thoughts about that.
The condition for work to happen?
Yeah, like when you opened up your loft and you made a theater, that's making a condition.
The thing that I thought of was that this April, we were going to do Quad, this Beckett play. And it's a silent play, and it's with 4 characters, and the costume is really important. It's red, blue, yellow, and white. And so we obviously weren't able to do it. And then our experience has been, my mother unexpectedly passed away in March, in mid-March. And so we ended up in Texas, in the suburbs, in Spring, Texas. And with our kids, with my sister and her family. And so, and of course, everything was, we never knew what was going to happen next in the world, but it was clear that, we weren't going to be doing Beckett's Quad in April in our theater. So I ended up, and maybe it's, part of this trying to feel, I was living with my mom and with all of her stuff, and I was thinking about making costumes for this piece. And so I started making costumes out of all of her clothes. And the only performers I had were my 3 kids and my sister's kid. And so I made the costumes for them, and then I made them perform it in the backyard. One of the things that I discovered is my kids will not listen to me, like when I get real performers or people that I know in New York. They're just like, they have their own ideas about styling their costume and all that kind of stuff. But I was interested in what would happen if you just did it for yourself. If there wasn't an audience, the audience was the performer, basically, because it was just us and David, me, and my sister and her husband. And we were just using stuff that I found in my mom's house. And what happens when you, and I still don't know kind of what I figured out from that, but you can make it yourself. I mean, you can just do it for yourself with what you have.
I think that's, I mean, I think when you make something, you're sort of saying something about the world you wish existed. So I think making the Beckett play yourself was like saying, this needs to happen. It won't happen without us. So we need to make it, And I think that that's where, sort of collaboration comes in. I think it's you invent a need for other people and then find the other people around you who will fill it, who will help you fill it. But I also think in terms of Bang on a Can, the way you mentioned it, it's like the beginning of the pandemic and every musician I knew was out of work. And so Bang on a Can, which does so many different kinds of musical things, but we actually employ a lot of people, and all of those people were hurting. And so we decided, we're just going to do these marathons, and we don't know if anyone will listen to them. We don't know if anyone will tune in. And in a way, that's not the point. The point is not to maximize our audience or to raise a lot of money, but it's to say to people who have been spending all of their time making music with each other, we're going to keep that up, and we're going to keep doing that, and that's necessary for us in this world, and we're going to keep working together, regardless of who's around, which I think is a little bit like your situation. And so again, I think it's like when you make something, you're making a statement about things you wished existed in the world. And that's sort of like the artist's imagination, I think, is you're trying to believe that the world can be improved if only it had this one new experience added to it. And if you can think that, then you might as well get to work and try to add that thing.
So,
Well, and that's faith in the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Anne, has this been a good time for you to get work done, or how's it been?
Well, I just think what you said earlier about how the context is changing so fast that it makes you relook at things that you're working on. With the lens seems to constantly be changing. Like something that had one kind of meaning a year ago maybe has a different kind of meaning or life now. I think because I have been working on a lot of public commissions that have a very long time frame. I don't think I've had the same immediate, like, oh, this thing, like the Beckett play can't happen. You know, my things have had these longer calendars. And so I feel like I have been able to immerse in those works actually a little bit differently. I didn't even know how I was traveling so much. Like, how was that happening? Um, and you know, I think a lot about. I feel like, you know, work all comes from questions. You have a question about something, you're curious about something, you read something in the newspaper, and then that starts a process. And I think from that, it's because in that you know there's a question for you there, you know there's something that you're trying to not necessarily answer, but you're trying to make the question visible or shareable. And so I feel like right now it's like trying to, it's this thing, do I have the right question? Is this a question? You know, I feel like I'm having a harder time in some ways trusting part of my process. I don't know if that's true for you. You know, I feel like, well, you do have to suspend yourself into not knowing.
Mhm.
That's the first thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's always true. But one of the things that I think we've realized since the whole everything shut down in mid-March was I realized that I feel like I was running around too much. Like every night I would be going to see something and see a play, see a show, whatever. And I'm with that taken away, I like sort of marinating in just, you know, books and just thinking. Whereas David has found he's quite the opposite. And he was running around all the time and traveling all the time, and it's really hard for him not to do it.
I thought that all the running around was really exhausting, and then I realized actually that's the fun part. You know, you make the music, you travel around the world, you rehearse people, you go to performances. And what I think this is kind of interesting about the pandemic is you don't necessarily have the opportunity to step back from your practice and go, well, what are its constituent parts? You think normally it's the whole thing. It's like I write the music, I copy the music, I send the music, I rehearse the music, I travel, I record it, whatever. I discovered through all this that the part that I really like the best is traveling around and having coffee with people and having a drink after the show and meeting new musicians, and like the social part of it ends up being, it's much more clear to me how important that was. And I never would have separated those things out without the pandemic.
Can I ask a question? Because obviously my role is to think about institutions, but clearly even before COVID and everything that's happened this year with police brutality and other things, people were questioning whether the institutions that we use as platforms are the right shape and have the right sort of directionality. And both of you, I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, the Philharmonic, right? Like, who is the audience for? What has changed and shifted? Who comes? You know, I was in a conversation that was not a single conversation, but a group conversation where Deborah Borda, is that her name?
Yes, Deborah Borda at the New York Philharmonic.
Who I just find so amazing as
She's a powerhouse.
Yeah, and she was talking about, you know, people don't buy subscriptions anymore. The average age is whatever, 65 plus. And, you know, she was talking about diversity initiatives and the things she'd done in LA and kind of changing. So these questions and these ideas about what institutions are and who they serve, I think are really actively being debated. We don't want to go back to them, but this has allowed, I think, for a really very quick and stark evaluation of, at least, you know, in the museum world, what needs to be worked on quickly. And you have both used, and you too, Anne, you know, utilized and been part of and helped shape institutional paradigms, but also produced alternatives when it's necessary. How do you feel about institutions right now as we do, if we are going to make a kind of productive pause of things? I think that there is the opportunity for us to say, okay, these parts we hold on to, these parts shift and change. I just love to hear as makers and as artists how you're feeling. I have a lot of angst about it, and I feel a lot of responsibility to be listening to artists right now and to be thinking differently in this next era. I feel like cultural institutions are these kind of micro case studies of what else is going on in the world. So I'd love to just hear you all talk about. It's probably super boring, but it's also what you navigate in your lives as well.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because a lot of what I do is in those institutions, and yet the reason why Bang on a Can was created was because those institutions weren't doing the things that we needed them to do.
Which were, tell me what those things were. I'd love to just hear you say what they were.
Well, I think, you have an institution to house, you build an institution to house the thing you already know you love.
Yeah.
And so that's, on the one hand, really great for finding the thing that you already know you love, but it makes it very difficult to find the thing you don't know you love yet.
Right.
And since as artists, that's what we're doing, is making things that don't exist yet.
Right.
It can be, kind of not only detrimental to the field, but it actually kind of distorts the field. For example, you mentioned subscription seasons. It's like, this is one of the things that classical music institutions run on.
Right.
It's selling subscription seasons, which is, we expect you to buy 10 concerts or to buy 20 concerts, and we're designing everything we do so that you will come to 20 concerts. You'll buy that. And what that means is we need to reduce the entire artistic culture to something that can appeal across 20 concerts.
Right.
So what it does is it actually places this incredible lid on what each of those concerts can accomplish and what kind of people can come. And so that has a huge distorting effect, not just to audiences, but to people who are trying to get work with those institutions, people who are trying to make music for those orchestras or for those string quartets or whatever. There are things which affect the way music is taught to young children.
Right.
Just like the institutional effects of all of these things, we don't even think about them. And I think that that's one of the interesting problems that comes out of the whole Black Lives Matter in classical music world conversation, is that these things run so deep into how people are educated that we don't even see them anymore as problems that can be solved. In order to solve those problems, you may need to go outside of those institutions in order to figure out how to solve them. And I think for Bang on a Can, one of the things that's been really great is that if you want to create a world in which we have different kinds of music which are next to each other without comment, if you have musicians from different worlds who are collaborating with each other without saying, this world is better than that world, the institutions were not built to do that.
Right.
So there's a way in which we feel like we've been sort of uniquely positioned to give people an image of what programming can look like in the future, because we've always been flexible and we've always been open and trying to invite people, and because we don't have to sell a certain number of seats and we don't have real estate and huge expenses, which I think is a real drawback for people, especially in my field.
Yeah, thank you.
I also think, when I think, Suzanne, about your practice, I think about someone like that. There was a point where, I knew your work more as a visual artist, and the context for that work was the gallery or the museum. And then you made an enormous shift with these live pieces, or to me, at least, I perceive it as an enormous shift where you in some ways brought everything you knew from one form into working in another form, and to working with performers, to a series of lectures, right? I think it started when the Museum of Modern Art asked you to do a lecture about your work, and you're like, I'm going to make that into a piece, if I'm right.
Yeah, and a lot of things kind of happened around that same time, and that's when I just had this kind of, I don't know what we call it, but I just wanted to Oh, I know what it was. Now I'm remembering. I moved my studio out of our loft, and we had this empty space. And so I said, let's build a theater. But I didn't know anything about theater. I didn't know anything about it at all. And it's kind of like build it and they will come. And then friends of ours had, oh, I'll do this or I'll do that. And then I started doing stuff too. And I kind of learned on the job. But one of the things that attracted me to sort of shifting over to the experimental theater world is that it's all about collaboration, and also it's not about, there's no money in it. It's not about money at all. And the art world, there was always this idea of like, did it sell? How much did it sell for? And there's all this kind of this structure, this monetary structure that's has a lot of power, and none of that has any power in experimental theater. There's absolutely no money in it whatsoever, and people do it only because they love it. And I don't know, I found that really irresistible.
Mhm.
Although you have also talked a lot, and I love it, about how you do maintain, you use art to problematize theater and theater to problematize art. There wasn't some kind of real, and I love that, because you do inhabit this liminal space where those two things continue to inform each other and kind of pull back the veil on whatever form it's assumed that you're occupying.
Yeah, one helps you look at the other.
Yeah.
But I wonder, as now you're the head of this museum and other things too, but the museum has.
I think that's it. I think that's the only thing I'm the head of.
But I thought the Wexner was the theater and the museum.
So it is a multidisciplinary center where presumably none of the things are, everything is weighted equally, which of course is easier to say than do. But yes, it is visual arts, performing arts, film, video, and an education, a very robust education program. And it's all those things. It's a center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, how do you negotiate like the whole thing with, does the Wexner have a collection, a permanent collection?
We don't. I mean, like the new museum where I was before, of course, that doesn't mean we don't actually have things, but we are non-collecting, much more like a Kunsthalle institution. I ask people that I trust, like you, and I spend hours talking to Anne about this, because I think we have the opportunity, both because we aren't collecting and we were established as experimental. I mean, we're called a laboratory for experimental art. But really actually being true to that mission. What does that look like? To say, all right, you two, we're going to invite you to come do, I don't know, but we want you to your point, David, we're not going to assume that what you make has an audience that's already in mind, right? But then how do you exist as an institution if you can't announce what the thing is? You can't, and it's interesting because I've worked this way for a long time, which is to say, it might not be the thing you hang on the wall. It's the thing that you do before anything gets, like, that's great. Maybe something gets hung on the wall, maybe it doesn't. But I do think this is a moment where I believe truly that people are really interested in what that looks like. And artists need those spaces. So, but what does that mean for an institution? How do you fundraise for it? How do you, so I'm asking kind of, because I want to learn from everybody who's done this for a long time, what a museum can look like. And we have models. I worked at the new museum, right? That's how that started, the Wexner too. So I'm excited and anxious about that proposal and that proposition.
Well, I think if you, I know that the Wexner has this great connection to your community, and you have people who love you and respect you. And I think that that's probably where your strength is. So, and I know I was once on a panel at BAM, which I said something that I think everyone was offended by, but which I meant as the greatest possible compliment, which is, I was asked what I thought was interesting at BAM. And I said, what I really love about BAM is I've seen so many things here which are really terrible.
Yeah.
And none of those things have gotten in the way of my wanting to come back.
Right.
that we're able to create this curiosity and this value of risk
Yes.
that made it so that the community of people experiencing something together, which was not satisfying, was by itself satisfying.
But they educated their audience to expect that too, to not expect every single thing that they went to was going to somehow be amazing and connect with them in a deep way. You came not knowing what was going to happen and being open to that. And in the same way, an artist doesn't know where something's going to lead them.
Right.
And somehow BAM had managed to educate their audience to expect that.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and that circles back around to trust, right? So, if you tell me you're doing something in your theater, I don't care what it is, I'm coming.
We'll see you there.
Okay. Before we finish, David, I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you came to make the piece. I think it was in Philadelphia with the instruments, and how you came to. Maybe you could just describe that project and how the active repair. Yeah.
I got this weird call from the guy who runs the Temple Contemporary, who said that he had gotten access to all the broken musical instruments of the city of Philadelphia. And this was Robert Blackson. It's the curator there, and it was meant to be a kind of art project. It's like we have access to these broken instruments. We want to get them fixed. We don't really know what we're going to do. And he just sort of said, what do you want to do? And I said, I have this, I immediately had this idea of making a giant piece for musicians of all levels across the city of Philadelphia to come and make a giant piece of music on these instruments, which don't work anymore, right? So we made this project, the Symphony for Broken Orchestra, and the whole idea was about kind of democratizing what the instruments are, making a real piece of music that actually sounded something in a real social event where amateurs and professionals were equal, where an audience came together and had something satisfying. But fundamentally, the idea was to shine the light on the fact that here it is, we have this majority minority school district, which has been deliberately impoverished, which has no money to pay for music in the public schools, where an instrument is broken and there's no money to fix it. It just goes into a closet, And to me, this was, when he described this project to me, when he described the existence of these instruments, it was so heartbreaking for me, because I am only a musician because there were instruments and there was music in my public school when I was growing up. My parents didn't know anything about music. There was no music in my house. It was totally by accident that I found music, and it was only because it was in the public school. And what I realized was that each of these instruments, and there were 1,500 broken instruments, each of these instruments represented a relationship with a kid where it could have changed that kid's life the way these instruments changed my life. And so there was something that was kind of, like as I started working on this project, it grew and grew into something that was more and more moral. And the more I got into it, the more angry I got. Because again, it's like these are poor, underprivileged children of color. Yeah, we don't care if they have culture. We don't care if they have music. We don't care if they have this incredible opportunity to build a world together where they find a way to cooperate and get along and build something bigger than themselves. Yeah, we don't care. The whole neglect of it was horrifying. So, I was incredibly happy to be asked to work on this project. And this project was very successful in managing to get people from the community to adopt these broken instruments and repair them and return them to the public schools. So now when you go into the public schools in Philadelphia and you play in a local orchestra in your elementary school or your junior high school, and you pick up a violin, there will be a tag in the box that says that it would who adopted this instrument and paid for its repair. So what I really liked also was it really was saying, like artists can fix things. artists are not abstractions or living on islands dealing with philosophy and jargon. You know, artists can actually work with real people and solve real problems. And to me, that was the most successful part of this. The really successful part of it is that I wrote this piece of music for these instruments, for all of these instruments that are broken. Then we fixed the instruments. You can't play the music anymore. You know, the music disappeared, the instruments got fixed, the project is ended.
You couldn't do it again with another city's broken instruments?
I'm sure you could do it with lots of other cities and lots of other broken instruments, but
not with repaired instruments.
yeah, now that you've repaired them, the instruments sound completely normal.
That's actually it's a really beautiful it's a beautiful sort of enactment of both, as you say, an idea and a kind of practical, you know, I think it is really important that the impact of the arts is visible. I think that something I've noticed is that everybody being away from each other has made me at least hear more appreciation for the arts and what it does, how it connects us, how it brings us together. But it's interesting, there's still not the value. People still don't think of artists as workers in the way that they should, right? So there is still work to do on that front, but I do think it's been heartening to see how people are now aware of the role that culture and art plays. But it'd be nice if that would also be met with the understanding of labor and finances. But
that would be great. But I do think back to your original question about this, you know, how do we live in the world that we're living in right now?
Yeah.
You know, there are problems that need to be fixed.
Yep.
You know, that's what we do, is we imagine things that could exist, that don't exist yet, that aren't going to exist without our hard work. So there's a way in which, you know, the arts and artists and arts institutions are situated to be the people who can lead us into the place where we want to be.
Absolutely. I always talk about it also in that way, which is that there are futures. It allows us to enable the thinking toward futures that people do not have immediately at hand. It's an important piece of civilization, really, as we know it. So I think we're about to run out of time, but can I ask one funny question? Because we've got the two of you, and we loved that. We thought that was so special. And you know, thinking about it, Anne, you're also partnered up with an artist. I live with another arts administrator. So we have this kind of joke in our house that once in a while we wish we could talk about anything else. How has it been over and we don't have to talk about a whole history, but how has your partnership, both as intimate partners and as artistic partners, evolved over these last months?
Well, you know, lately all we've been talking about is politics because, you know,
well, right.
There's been so much going on. But I also think, do we talk about art that much?
Yeah, we kind of do.
Oh, come on. Of course you both talk about art all the time.
Well, I don't know.
We talk about work. We talk about other people's work.
We talk about what we're getting at the grocery store.
Yeah.
We talk about a lot of like just everyday, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
I just think it's always really moving to see people who have had their whole lives, you know, and have enacted a lot probably of support for one another. And it's anyway, I just wanted to mark that you're our only duo, I think.
I think one of the things that is great is that if I have something that I'm not sure about and I want a quick opinion about, there's someone right there to give me that.
I have a quick opinion.
Yeah.
But we've learned a lot from each other. You know, it's like we really because the thing that's really interesting for us is that our areas of interest are overlapping and complementary.
It's kind of a Venn diagram.
Yeah, we have a little Venn diagram here. So so it's actually been really useful for me to be able to go over all of my stupid ideas with somebody.
And we think very differently about things.
Very
and so
differently.
that's been good. Yeah. I mean, is that true with you and Tim? I mean, you think very differently, or you kind of are sympathetic?
Totally differently, but exactly as you describe it. Like I feel like it's such a relief actually, to be able to have the same vocabulary and the same language, but maybe come at it from these different angles. But it is interesting. Sometimes I think and now we've been together long enough that you come to rely on this dialogue. And in this moment, we've been in this house for a year together, but we realized we've been in this house more than we've ever been in. We lived in our last apartment for 10 years, but we were never there.
Right.
So you're sharing a different kind of time and space. And that's interesting. So, but it's also, I just think it's moving in a way to see makers or thinkers, or however we want to think about ourselves, sharing space. And it's usually invisible, but Zoom has made all of our lives a little bit more visible in an interesting way. So,
but this has been, I was just saying to David the other day, it's like we're on a deserted island, because especially since it's become wintertime and we can't really interact with anybody outside, it's like we're really feel more by ourselves than we ever have before.
Yeah, exactly. You're alone, but you're together.
Yeah.
And we're trying to avoid being in places because of the pandemic, whatever. So it's not just on a deserted island, it's even sort of like on the International Space Station or something. You're really isolated. And so,
Anne, any last thoughts or questions? This was really enjoyable for me.
for us too.
I mean, I just think about, thinking about being in a art couple, or, a partner that also does, I think when I go to talk to Michael, it's like I go over and I say, like, I have an art problem, or I have an art emergency. And can I make an appointment with you, to talk about it? But I don't know. I think it's like just even seeing the two of you, I think it's the way that we also give each other permission for the questions we have, and to occupy the space we're all in, like, and I think that's why we're doing this. So even though we're on, Spaceship Galactica or whatever, these points of contact really are like food, right? And the food for believing that making matters, and making into the world. So, I'm really grateful for both of your work that you've made in the past. And I'm really looking forward to whatever comes out of this. Because we're not going back, we're going forward into something that we have to actually invent. And that means, like, what the institutions do and how they respond to what work needs, and how the forms of work change by these questions. I think we started out talking about difficulty, and we ended up maybe a little bit, David, with your piece talking about repair. So I think that's a good place to stop. Let's all be repairers.
I like that.
There's a lot to repair.
And
We'll be busy.
Okay. And we'll see you soon, maybe with something in hand.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for taking time. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.